For a very long time, I've had this obsession with the idea of how much a mirror controls our perception of ourselves. Perception, as you would know if you listen to this podcast at all, is something that I end up coming back to all the time. But I think, especially since the beginning of 2025, negative self-perception has really taken over my mind. I found myself in many moments feeling lost when I look in the mirror and not necessarily seeing a clear direction. But it was when I was listening to XXX by Kendrick Lamar that I realized that there's something more to this idea. On that song, Kendrick raps, "America's reflections of me, that's what a mirror does." This idea that Kendrick proposes of a mirror distorting who he is, of America distorting who he is, and then tying the two together to better make his point, only led me further and further down this rabbit hole, wondering how many times Kendrick has used a mirror or perception or reflection to better articulate his point. 2022's Mirror is an obvious example of this, but he does it all the time. He does it on Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst. He does it on Real. He does it on Mother I Sober. He does it on Poetic Justice. He does it on Count Me Out, and again and again and again. The further I went, the further I got to see him utilizing mirroring as a clever tactic to get across his point. But I found myself really stuck on XXX and the idea of a mirror doing the opposite of its job. That instead of making something clearer, it was actually distorting reality. So today, we're going to talk about self-perception. I want us to explore this idea of who we're basing our perception off of, if they may be distorting it, and then how much we let that define our value. I quite often think about the fact that there was a time that we only saw a reflection in passing in the clear lake below us, that seeing ourselves was a much more fleeting and magical experience, that our reflection didn't mirror our worth, it was merely just a face looking back at us. What would our world look like if we didn't lose our identity by the hands of our own minds or the criticism of our own thoughts? Even though today's topic, in comparison to what Kendrick can write, is much less complex. I didn't win a Pulitzer Prize, okay? And I'm honestly hardly sure I said the word right. But I would love for today to be a space where we can expand our limiting beliefs about ourselves, and to do that alongside the writings and words of Kendrick Lamar. I've always been hesitant to write about someone that I see as one of the best writers of our time. The bar just felt so extremely high that I simply never tried. It's a daunting task for many reasons, mostly because of the levels of excellence that he's reached, but also because I just feel unqualified to speak on a lot of the things that he speaks about. It's no secret that I've grown up in a very different way than Kendrick Lamar, due to things like gender, race, age, and even if we had grown up in the same ways, we would have contextualized the world in our own ways because we would have been two separate people. But none of that stops the massive influence that he has had on my life. Kendrick has taken over so many aspects of my brain, and as soon as I realized that, when I sat down to write this, the words just kept on coming. There is just no world in which this podcast exists without his music and the way that it shaped the way I see music and art, and therefore the world. So I hope that today scratches that itch in your brain. I hope that something I say honors the individual who began the spark. And I hope that my honesty reaches you and relates to you in some way. I became a Kendrick fan at a very opportune moment in my life. I was in middle school and Damn had just been released, and simultaneously I decided that rap was just the coolest thing in the world. But the moment that I realized that Kendrick was much more than just a musician was a few years later when I stumbled upon the Dissect podcast episodes that were going through the album Damn. I simply could not comprehend a musician who thought through their written content so much that every single song intertwined. That album genuinely changed the way that I perceived music, and from then on, it wasn't even a question in my mind that I was just obsessed with Kendrick's brain. And then when Mr. Morale dropped, it was the first time that I really got to sit through a Kendrick album from its initial release and really intake it for everything that it was. And since then, Mr. Morale has existed on a back burner in my brain throughout everything. For me, that album was everything I could have asked for and more. I got to sit in on a therapy session for one of my favorite creatives. I got the insight into Kendrick's mind and everything that he wanted to share. Respectfully, thank you, Kendrick. I still see Crown as one of the most masterful pieces from composition to lyrics. The Heart Part 5 feels like it's tattooed in my brain. Disc 2 of that album is arguably one of my favorite pieces of musicianship, and especially Mirror as a closer, it feels like the weight of the world has been lifted. His words, "I choose me," alongside the swinging strings feel like a statement of freedom. And the more that I listened to that song, the more I attached myself to it, but specifically the way in which Kendrick presents the mirror, which was such a parallel to how he presented it on XXX. On Mirror, he raps, "Faith in one man is a ship sinking. Do yourself a favor and get a mirror that mirror grievance. Then point it at me so the reflection can mirror freedom." So because Kendrick has exemplified a mirror in two completely opposing ways, we are going to follow in his footsteps today, and we're going to separate this podcast episode into two halves. So today we're going to talk about the way that a mirror can be used to distort our reality, to trick the mind or convince it of something that is not true. And then next week, we're going to talk about the way we can look at a mirror and use it as a metaphor, and the way we can utilize it to reflect the things that matter in our lives, not just our physical reflection that looks back at us. But before we dive into how a mirror can become distorted, we need to break down the album Damn itself. One of the first things you will notice when you look at Damn is the way that the songs relate to and parallel each other, or for the sake of today's episode, how they mirror one another. There's many ways to interpret Damn, but one of my favorite ways is in its juxtaposition, with titles like Pride and Humble, Loyalty and Lust, Feel and Love, all mirroring each other in their placement on the album. This idea of being able to see things in two opposing ways will become very important later on in this episode. The second extremely notable thing to mention when we're listening to Damn is the fact that it can be listened to traditionally, as in order from start to end, or it can be listened to in reverse, which again becomes a key component in the way that Kendrick portrays his messaging and in the life of his character Kung Fu Kenny. The album Damn will tell two separate stories, revealing two separate endings, and whichever one you hear is based on the perspective that you choose to see it from. Kendrick's use of mirroring on Damn is a very effective tool to show us that there is always two sides to the story. You can live within pride, or you could live humbly. You could seek lust, or you could seek loyalty. And whichever you choose will determine the path that you take, which in terms of the album is life or death. As quoted from the opening track, Blood, "Is it wickedness? Is it weakness? You decide. Are we going to live or die?" So now that we have that clear, let's move on to the musical focus of today's episode, which is the track XXX. On this track, Kendrick proposes the idea that a mirror can actually reflect whatever somebody wants it to. He makes this example in the line, "America's reflections of me, that's what a mirror does," when he pronounces a mirror as Amera for America. If we run it forward to the bridge, Kendrick has U2 from Bono sing, "It's not a place, this country is to me a sound of drum and bass. You close your eyes to look around." And then Kendrick follows with the verse, "Hail Mary, Jesus, and Joseph. The great American flag is wrapped and dragged with explosives. Compulsive disorder, sons and daughters, barricaded blocks and borders, look what you taught us. It's murder on my street, your street, back streets, Wall Street, corporate offices, banks, employees, and bosses with homicidal thoughts. Donald Trump's in office. We lost Barack and promised. to never doubt him again. But is America honest, or do we bask in sin? Pass the gin, I mix it with American blood, then bash him in. You crippin' or you married to blood? I'll ask again. Oops, accident. It's nasty when you set us up, then roll the dice, then bet us up. You overnight the big rifles, then tell Fox to be scared of us. Gang members or terrorists, etc., etc. America's reflections of me. That's what a mirror does. Now again, I'm not the perfect person to be sitting here and going word for word through this verse with you, but I am also not the person to brush over the very profound point that Kendrick is making here and therefore on a much larger scale. In the context of today's episode, we need to focus in on that last line. America's reflections of me, that's what a mirror does. To start, I know that I don't need to explain a mirror to you guys, but if we were to take that line and explain it in a different way, it would read out like this. A mirror reflects America's ideas of me. Or as Kendrick accented, a mirror reflects America's ideas of me. This is extremely important to understand because this is where we can clearly perceive that Kendrick is saying that America has these preconceived notions of who they want him to be, and then they have forced it upon their people through media. We can draw this conclusion because earlier in that verse, Kendrick references Fox News, which directly relates to the clipped audio on the beginning of DNA, an earlier track on Damn. In the audio, the news reporters give their opinions on Kendrick's song All Right, where they are not only racist but uneducated in their perception of its meaning. Therefore, from the line, America's reflections of me, that's what a mirror does, we can see the way that media has used a mirror to distort his image. This highlights the very dangerous elements of a mirror, which is that they can be used as very useful tools. The key word there is tool. For instance, you could take a shovel and you could use it for its intended purpose, or you could take a shovel and you could smash a window, or you could take a camera and you could capture the moon, or you could take that same camera and capture a secret. Every tool can be used for its intended purpose or for ill intent. We cannot be so quick to forget that a mirror is also a tool. Whether it's news or social media or conversation or art, and whether it's to push racist narratives or political angles, we need to not lose sight of the fact that a mirror doesn't always reflect the truth. As we talked about earlier on this episode, Kendrick heavily uses the technique of parallel on the album Damn. Life or death, wickedness or weakness, culture or God. And his protagonist in the album, Kung Fu Kenny, goes throughout it, trying to decide which path he will take. Will he follow the way of the world, or will he follow the way of God? This led me to wonder if there are any scriptures that reference a mirror, so I took it upon myself to look that up, and I happened to find two that fell very in line with today's episode and then next week's episode. James 1 verse 22 to 25 reads, "But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. Because if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like someone looking at his own face in a mirror. For he looks at himself, goes away, and immediately forgets what kind of person he was." Let's read that last half one more time. He is like someone looking at his own face in a mirror. For he looks at himself, goes away, and immediately forgets what kind of person he was. Once that verse settled into my mind, it immediately brought me back to Bono's final line on his verse in the song, which is, "You close your eyes to look around." A line that has stuck with me ever since I heard it for the first time. To close your eyes to look around means to choose to see the world in the way that you want to turn a blind eye to the truth. In that same verse, Bono also sings about America. It's not a place, he says. And as anything else Kendrick does within composition, I do not believe it is without intentional thought, and this is no exception to that. Back in middle school, when I read the credit for this song under the title for the first time and saw U2, I was excited and puzzled all at the same time. The collaboration felt so unexpected, and I remember it as one of the first times my understanding of music was really challenged. But last year, on my episode titled The Joshua Tree, where I took a deep dive into U2's album, it became very evident why they were featured on XXX. I saw very clearly U2's interest in the American dream, and also how quickly they came to see that it really was that, just a dream. With this context, it makes complete sense why it is U2 that is featured on this song. The lyrical choice of "It's not a place" reminds us that while in many ways Kendrick is directly criticizing America, he is also referring to it as a mindset. A mindset that can refer to all human nature, not just a country. A mindset that prioritizes the self, that indulges in the vices, and has a every man for himself perspective. Hence the lyric, "Is America honest, or do we bask in sin?" Obviously, what leads Kendrick to write America's reflections of me, that's what a mirror does, is influenced by his earlier callback to that clipped audio by Fox News, and probably by many other things he's experienced in his life or seen people experience in the life around him. So I want to be clear when I say, when I'm asking us to look inward towards ourselves and to be critical of the people who might be influencing the way we perceive ourselves, I'm not referring to racism or sexism or ageism or hate or any of those things, but rather I would like to highlight through Kendrick's storytelling the lessons that we can take from him, so that in moments of anxiety or insecurity or shame, we can look past the reflection that we see in the mirror, and we can identify maybe the ways our image has been distorted. This begs the question, who are you letting determine your value, and what vices might you be holding on to that are actually holding you back? When I asked myself this question as I was writing today's episode, I realized how much I base my expectations of myself based on the lives around me, based on my friends' lives around me. And if we were to go even further back, I'd see just how much I based my perception off the people I saw on TV or the YouTubers that I watched. I was always constructing my image after the people that I looked up to. But the issue with that was the more I did this, the more I actually lost a sense of self. This is something I've come to learn even more over the past few months as I've watched all my friends pave their own pathways in their lives. I didn't even realize how much I was floundering until it came time to ask myself what I wanted for 2025, and I didn't have an answer. And as I write this today, I'm realizing that those feelings never went away. I simply just stopped focusing on them. By mirroring my life around those around me, when it finally came time to look at my own reflection, I couldn't see myself. I became an active participant in distorting my own image. The things that I believed about myself, like I could never do that because I might fail, and if I fail, it might be the end of the world, were a reflection of the things that I had experienced in my life. What we see, hear, or experience in our life heavily affect our self-concept, or in other words, the way we see ourselves, carry ourselves, and treat the people around us because of that. This is something that we'll dive into on a much deeper level next week, just as Kendrick does with Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. But today, we really need to focus on those negative beliefs and where they might come from. In the process of writing today's episode, I asked myself the question, what do I want to accomplish with this? Because to be frank, this episode has sat written up on my laptop for over a month as I kept trying to convince myself I had completed the final product. I even have a half-edited recording of this podcast that last week I thought was the final product, but here I am. Fearing the fact that it's incomplete, fearing the fact that I didn't do it justice enough. So again, I ask myself, what is my goal? And to that, I guess that I'd say, I want to leave you with the encouragement that you can break through all these ideas of yourself that are holding you back. You see, in the process of writing this episode and next week's episode, it has forced me to look at the lenses that I was perceiving myself through. It forced me to take accountability for the ways I was actively holding myself back due to fear. It forced me to acknowledge the fact that I've spent my entire life plagued by extreme thinking. But more importantly, It allowed me to question what my life would look like if I didn't live in accordance to what my mind told me. So throughout the last month, I started challenging the initial belief of I could never do that with the counter of what would my life look like if I did do that? And do I want my life to look like that? Breaking this boundary for myself has opened up my mind to so many more possibilities. It has taught me that I have the power to make my own decisions. It has taught me that I can trust myself to be okay, even if I fail. And lastly, it has taught me about the privilege that I have to feel anxious about things that are positive in my life, experiences that I get to look forward to, even if they're not a part of my life yet. And because of that, I'm starting to make conscious choices to make myself uncomfortable in order to grow. I'm not sure if there will come a day where we can look in the mirror and be satisfied with everything that reflects back to us. But I know that there will come a day where we realize that what reflects back to us in the mirror actually reflects the least of who we are in our souls, in our minds, and our hearts. And in order to be able to see that when we step in front of ourselves, to see the ways that our expectations may be distorted by those around us, or the dreams of our youth, or the weight of societal norms, we need perspective. Kendrick begins the Heart Part 5 by saying, "As I get older, I realize life is perspective." Sometimes the things in life that are designed to make it clearer, like mirrors or cameras, actually make it blurrier. Finally, there are two terms that are often used in sports, which are floor and ceiling. It refers to this idea that every player has a floor, in other words, a bare minimum, and a ceiling, which is their ability to elevate their game to a higher level than expected. Ultimately, the goal of the coach would be to raise the ceiling of each of his players in order to give them the best odds to succeed. In consuming art such as the caliber of something that Kendrick Lamar creates, he is giving us the same opportunity. It is the greatest gift to be challenged by what we consume, as long as we are aware enough to see what it can do for us. Look beyond the reflection of the world inside of you. Please join me next week as we look into the song Mirror and everything that we can learn about Kendrick's perspective of a mirror on that song. As always, all sources and social media are in the show notes below. Let's let music bring us together, and don't forget to grow up slowly.